Study Session 12, African Epistemology. Introduction. In this study session, we will discuss the concept of epistemology. We will also explain a special African mode of knowing epistemology. Finally, we will take a look at the sources of African epistemology. When you have studied this session, you should be able to 1. Define and use correctly the term epistemology. 2. Discuss African mode of epistemology. 3. Highlight the sources of African epistemology. Meaning of epistemology. Epistemology is a branch of philosophy that deals with knowledge. It analyzes and evaluates knowledge claims. It is the study of theories about the nature and scope of knowledge, the evaluation of the presumptions and basis of knowledge, and the scrutiny of knowledge claims. Is there a special African mode of knowing? In this section, we will review two divergent views to the question of a special African mode of knowing, using the propositions of two scholars, Senghor and Wiredu. There is a unique African epistemology, Senghor. As we have already told you, there are among African philosophers those who believe that there is a unique African mode of knowing. Senghor, the Senegalese statesman, was in the forefront of it all. Again, it was Tempo's Bantu philosophy that provided the awakening in Senghor to formulate negritude. Negritude is Senghor's special philosophy aimed at rehabilitating African culture for the purpose of political struggle. Along the line, Senghor saw that one way of rebuilding African culture was to include African epistemology in his negritude platform. This African epistemology is presented by Senghor and his followers as the way the Africans understand, interpret, and apprehend reality within the context of the African cultural experience. When all is said and done, Senghor's views can be put together as a belief in epistemological monism. For him, the African does not draw any line of demarcation between the epistemic subject, that is the knower, and the epistemic object, what is to be known. The African, as this view continues, reacts to the object in a sensuous, emotive, and intuitive understanding, rather by abstraction. The simple point here is that the African does not detach himself from the subjects to be known, but merely imposes his particular subjective view and reading upon the object. According to Senghor, the Negro-African sympathizes, abandons his personality to become identified with the other, dies to be reborn in the other. He does not assimilate, he is assimilated. He lives a common life with the other. He lives in symbiosis. All that Senghor is claiming is that there is an African mindset, unique in its ability to be united with its environment without knowing the difference between the subject and the object, and in this way, such a mind comes to know things. A unique African epistemology is an illusion, Wiredu. A great number of professional African philosophers are united in the rejection of a unique African mode of knowing, or epistemology. In some cases, tempers rose to the point that the criticisms became personal. People abandoned logical and rational arguments to simply hurl invectives at the protagonist of a unique African epistemology. This is evident in Wiredu's sustained attacks against Senghor. In enumerating the many evils that are drawing back the prospect of development in Africa, Wiredu included Senghor and his idea of a unique African epistemology. Yes, Wiredu agrees that this traditional mode of understanding, utilizing, and controlling external nature and interpreting the place of man within it may even exist everywhere in Africa. But because it is African epistemology, it's intuitive, essentially unanalytic, and unscientific. Senghor couldn't have celebrated it. What still, in Muredu's opinion? Senghor trended to exaggerate the roles of emotion in thinking of Africans, and he even seemed inclined to postulate a biological foundation for the alleged differentiating characteristics of the African outlook in a manner that does little credit to his great learning. It is almost as if he, Senghor, has been trying to exemplify in his own thought and discourse the lack of analytical habits which he has attributed to the biology of the Africa. What Muredu is saying here is that Senghor himself was trying to make himself an example of an African who could not think in a logical, rational, or scientific way. Muredu's general view is right. Although the attacks on Senghor is rather harsh, philosophers sometimes do this in order to drive a point home, but making our point in a different way is better. To return to the main point, Muredu is again right in saying that there is a place for intuition and emotion in a human being's life, the same as there should also be a place for logic and rationality. The African, he concludes, possesses these two sides of life, or if the African does not, this authentic African epistemology should include both sides of life. But Senghor is not entirely without a point. There could be a way of knowing peculiar to Africans, only that Senghor went too far. Now, we need to clarify that there are some ways of knowing that may indeed be unique to Africans, but the wise points are 1. Apart from the unique ways of knowing in Africa, many Africans do think in a logical and analytic way. 2. Even if Africans rely on emotion, intuitive knowledge, hierarchical authoritarianism, and superstition for knowledge, we should not celebrate such features of African epistemology. This is because they will hamper development in Africa, which we badly need. Our discussion in the next subtitle will show this more clearly. Sources of African epistemology. According to Udugume, 1995, there are many sources of acquiring knowledge in traditional African societies. He lists 7 such sources. 1. Perceptual knowledge. Africans depend on observation rather than experimentation as a method of acquiring knowledge. That is to say that traditional Africans believe in knowledge acquired through the senses. What one sees, touches, feels, hears, and tastes are usually regarded as true, especially if a third party confirms such an observation. 2. Experiential knowledge. If something happens repeatedly in Africa, and if many people observe it, then it becomes a reference point, perhaps without further inquiry. Holistic knowledge. This is the view of knowledge that Senghor and Anyanwu so much favored. Here, the subject and the object are united or not separated during the act of knowing. 4. Extrasensory or mystical knowledge. This kind of knowledge goes beyond what we can observe with the senses. Diviners, mediums, priests, native doctors, rainmakers, and herbalists are usually approached to acquire mystical knowledge. They are of course feared or revered for their ability to mediate between human beings and spirits. 5. Premonitive knowledge. In Africa, virtually everyone may claim to have this kind of knowledge. Someone is about to make a journey and hits his left foot. on a tree stump or a stone, then he may cancel the journey because that was a clear sign of an impending danger. Incessant sneezing is a sign that your name is being mentioned in a shrine with evil intent, and so on. 6. Ontological knowledge. Again, this is another source of knowledge that many professional philosophers, including Buredu, object to. This is because here, the African arranges all beings in an ascending order, with God at the topmost, and in this way, an elder's knowledge claim would weigh heavily, even if contradicted by many youths, assuring they are even allowed to speak. 7. Oral tradition. We have talked about the oral tradition before as a source of knowledge, information, beliefs, custom, worldviews, etc. are handed down from one generation to another through myths, legends, stories, proverbs, folk tales, songs and dances, liturgies and rituals, pithy sayings, riddles and adages, ideas, social attitudes, conventions, and institutions. You will also recall that the professional philosophers rejected this as an approach to African philosophy, saying that philosophy cannot be done without writing. They also say that knowledge passed on through oral tradition is unreliable. Study session summary. In this study session, we defined epistemology as a branch of philosophy which studies the nature, scope, and possibility of human knowledge. Some African philosophers claim that there is a unique African mode of knowing. Senghor is the leading figure among this group. He claims that intuition and emotion are to the Africans, as logic and rationality are to the Europeans. Kwesi Wiredu is a major critic of this Senghorian understanding of African epistemology. End of study session 12. Thank you for listening.